A while back, a friend of mine who is a parent, a pet lover, and a Roman Catholic forwarded to me a story about a little girl and her dog. It's a story that he found on the internet, one of those stories that went viral at the time. Who says that Unitarian Universalists don't have a huge variety of scriptures? And in this story, a little girl named Meredith had a 14-year-old dog named Abby, and Abby died. 14 is really old for a big yellow Labrador, so it's proof that she'd had a happy and a long life. The next day, 4-year-old Meredith was crying and talking about how much she missed Abby. And like her mom, she found comfort in her belief in a God that takes care of all living things. So she asked her mother if she could write a letter to God. She dictated as her mother wrote, "Dear God, will you please take care of my dog? She died yesterday and is with you in heaven. I miss her very much. I'm happy that you have let me have her as my dog, even though she got sick. I hope you will play with her. She likes to swim and play with balls. I'm sending you a picture of her so that when you see her, you'll know that she is my dog. Love, Meredith." So Meredith and her mother put the letter in an envelope with a picture of the little girl and her dog, and they sealed the envelope and they addressed it simply to God, and heaven was the only address. Then they put their return address on the envelope, and Meredith put a whole bunch of stamps on the front of the envelope because she figured it would take a lot of stamps to get the letter to heaven. And then they brought it to the post office. And a few days later, Meredith asked her mom if God had gotten the letter yet, and her mother told her that she thought he probably had. Now, apparently, Meredith's mom is convinced that God is a he and not a she or a they. The next day, there was a package wrapped in gold paper on the front porch, and it was addressed simply to Meredith. Now, her mother didn't recognize the address, so it didn't recognize the handwriting. There was no return address. She didn't know where it came from. It probably wasn't the most prudent thing in the world, but she threw caution to the wind and let Meredith open the package. And inside was a book by Mr. Rogers called When a Pet Dies. And taped to the inside front cover was the letter where Meredith and her mother had written to God, and it was still in its opened envelope. And on the opposite page was a picture of Abby and Meredith and a note. "Dear Meredith, Abby arrived safely in heaven. Having the picture was a big help, and I recognized her right away. She isn't sick anymore. Her spirit is here with me just like it stays in your heart. Abby loved being your dog. Since we don't need our bodies in heaven, I don't have any pockets to keep your picture in, so I'm sending it back to you in this little book for you to keep and have something to remember Abby by. Thank you for the beautiful letter, and thank your mother for helping you write it and send it to me. What a wonderful mother you have. I picked her especially for you. I send my blessings every day to you. And remember that I love you very much. By the way, I'm easy to find. I am wherever there is love. Love, God." Well, isn't that a sweet story? I have to admit, though, and I know this might come as a bit of a shock, I don't believe that God wrote the letter to Meredith. I don't think God is a kind grandfather with a beard up in the sky who works that way. What I think happened is that somebody at the post office opened the letter, saw that a child was sad and hurting, and wanted to help. I'm sure that the postal worker, who may have been a mother, thought about how hard it can be at times like that to help a child. And so that person helped the best they could. And that is pretty amazing. Now that the child dedication is done, And that joy has had a chance to really sink in with all of us. I want to tell you how angry I am. This week's leak of the Supreme Court draft opinion to overturn Roe versus Wade wasn't a surprise to me at all. It feels like it's been an inevitability since the election of the last Republican president and the shenanigans that preceded that event around blocking President Obama's Supreme Court nomination in early 2016. But I'm still angry. I'm angry for the people who will be forced to carry pregnancies to term against their will. I'm angry for the people who will be hurt or killed in back alley abortions they seek out in desperation. I'm angry for the people who will be told that the potential lives of fetuses matter more than their own. I'm furious as hell with the people who claim to be protecting the lives of the unborn, yet won't do anything to care for the children who are actually born. Most of all, I'm angry about the implications this decision will have for the sovereignty of this nation as states pass laws criminalizing movement between them to obtain services in other states. And the rights this decision will give to state legislatures to reverse legal protections currently extended to populations that they don't like. People of color, interracial couples, same-sex couples, transgender people, and many more. A few days ago on public radio, I heard a local leader of a national organization of women rabbis say that she was tempted to just go up to the Bema on Friday and scream for 8.5 minutes, the length of her average sermon. I've been fighting that temptation to do that today. But like the good rabbi, I know that while screaming may be cathartic, it only adds to the shrill pitch of public discourse. And worse, when you're screaming, you're not listening. So, the topics of our services, including all the rituals and resources that go into them, especially on Sundays like this. Those resources are usually planned weeks in advance. And when I chose that story to tell this morning about Meredith and her dog, Abby, I found a lot of charm in it. When I first encountered the story, I got a little goosebumpy. I was moved by the idea that a child could get so much comfort from writing a letter to a God that she believed loved and protected her. The story reminded me of the God that I talked to as a child, when I was still embodied enough to sing and dance with reckless abandon and to not worry that I'd look crazy speaking out loud to somebody without a presence of body. The story was a reminder to me that for many children, God is a personal companion and a powerful protector. And that's a pretty amazing thing for a little child to have in a world where adults seem to be afraid so much of the time. And I have to be honest, I love Mr. Rogers. I love that the postal worker sent that book because Mr. Rogers did a great job of explaining hard life circumstances to children in a way that allowed room for their imagination, that honored their array of emotions, and let them know that they're not alone. But I have to admit, even the first time I read that story, there was something about the letter from the postal worker that felt so presumptuous. I mean, speaking for God? Really? So I thought this morning that I was going to speak to you about that letter and about my understanding of God, not as an anthropomorphic super being, but as more of a force of energy that connects us, that constant, creative, destructive energy that keeps the universe ever growing, ever changing, ever moving in the direction of greater love, greater knowledge, and greater justice. I thought I'd be talking this morning a bit about how I see God as a verb and not a noun. But this week, after the leak of the Supreme Court document, everything just feels different. You know, in that same news story in which the rabbi talked about wanting to scream, another woman shared the joy she feels about the probability of Roe being overturned, her joy. She imagined that all of a sudden women, and of course she used the word women, would give birth to babies they were unsure about, fall in love with them, and forget they ever had any doubts at all about continuing their pregnancies, and the whole world would be better. And I'm sorry, but that sounded like willfully blind ignorance to me, and presumptuous. She sounded like she was speaking for God, like the person in the post office who sent the book to little Meredith. Not speaking directly to God, but speaking on behalf of a God that they want to be real. All these people who claim to be protecting the lives of the unborn don't really seem to care what happens to women who have to choose between their own lives and the potential lives of fetuses that may have to live with horrifying abnormalities, or the devastation its birth could cause in the lives of the already living, including death and back alley abortions. They don't seem to care that we could go back to the days of overflowing orphanages and countless children being pushed around in a system that doesn't have the resources to care for them. Overturning Roe v. Wade will demand more of those people than just providing a few weeks of free diapers to newborns or sending a book to a child. They aren't the ones who are going to raise the children who don't have families. But they seem to think that if they're speaking for God and doing God's work, that somehow that'll make everything all right, like they're healing the world. You know, I'm trying really hard to not sound angry. I really am trying. Because I know that there are vast numbers of Christians who support and even fight for reproductive freedom. So I don't want to sound like I'm throwing all Christians into one unfair category. And I also know that anger doesn't work. What works, I hope, is a better way of engaging with people in need, a way that our faith offers. You see, as a Unitarian Universalist, if I were the person in the post office who intercepted that letter from little Meredith, I hope that I would have taken an approach very different from presuming to speak for any God. My hope is that I would have sent that book to her with a note from myself saying something like, God doesn't have a body like you and I do. God is everywhere. God is the love you feel in your heart for Abby and your mother and for God. And I have no way of getting your letter to God, but I was very moved by it and grateful that I got to receive it. I would like to give you this gift and hope that as you grow older, you remember that there are ways that we can all reach out to one another when we feel sad or lonely or afraid. We can care for each other in times of need the way you reached out to God to help Abby. That is how God lives within each one of us. At least, I hope. That's what I would have written. And if someone were to show up here on a Sunday facing a tough decision about whether to terminate a pregnancy or not, I know that I wouldn't tell them that they'd be a criminal for having an abortion. I know that I wouldn't offer simplistic theology that would make me feel better, morally superior, but that would dump the weight of the world on them. I know that I would listen. I would offer compassion and support. I know that I would let that person know that they have autonomy over their own body and that God isn't some wrathful monster ready to torture them for all of eternity. I guarantee you that I would not offer a pittance of assistance and send them on their way to raise an unwanted child in the long shadow of my judgment. I wouldn't shame them into risking their own life in order to save a fetus. But I could offer companionship. I could offer the support of a community that seeks to meet people exactly where they are, to journey with them through a tough period, and to celebrate with them when they make it through to the other side. And if they decided to have that child, I know that I could offer that we could dedicate ourselves to nurturing parent and child on their spiritual journeys, the way that we committed ourselves today to 6 children in our congregation. That's the vow that we make. Not to condemn anyone, not to force our morality or theological beliefs onto anyone else. We vow to be present to each other, to offer love, kindness, support, and encouragement through struggles and celebrations. Our vow is not just to our children and to their parents. Our vows are to each other. Our vow is to the world. It's not easy to keep a vow, though, is it? Especially now when so many of us are so angry and afraid, and all we want to do is scream. We're never at our best when we're angry and afraid. We break our vows. We lash out in ugly ways. We make unreasonably harsh judgments without really knowing anything about the people we live beside. And though each of us has broken our vows 1,000 times, this really is no caravan of despair, because we come back to our vows. We come back to our covenant again and again and again. And to me, that's what Unitarian Universalism is. We know we aren't perfect. We know we don't have all the answers. But we try to keep showing up and calling each other back into relationship when we fail. And that, I think, is worth sharing. So if you're wondering what you can do right now in response to the Supreme Court regarding Roe v. Wade, I have a couple of suggestions. First, fight like hell. Fight like your life depends upon it, because it does. And if you are a male-bodied person, if you identify as a man, if you've never had a set of ovaries, then you have an additional responsibility to fight especially hard as an ally, as somebody who has the power to change the minds of people whose minds are open to being changed. The goal is to ensure that motherhood is optional. The goal is to save lives. Fight. And the second thing you can do is to share the good news of Unitarian Universalism. This is no time for casual faith. This is no time to hide in the saving grace of our faith for fear of looking like an evangelical or some religious zealot. This is time to be an evangelist. This is time to be a zealot for our principles. Be someone who shares their belief that each one of us has incredible worth and dignity. Be someone who shares your knowledge that your liberty is tied up with the liberty of everyone else, and you act on it. Be someone who invites people, especially people in need, into this space where we celebrate our interconnectedness as each of us makes our own decisions about our own bodies and our own lives. Because now, inviting someone into this space may really save a life.